You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
So while I was waiting for you, I've been playing a record which I don't think I've played this century, Mark. And here it is. And if you're only a Patreon supporter, you've been watching this in glorious glowing colour as well as hearing it in stereophonic sound. That's the record I've just been playing, Mark.
Oh, yes.
Misty in Roots, live at the County Eurovision 79.
Didn't you always used to say that was your favourite?
No, I didn't actually. You may be confusing.
No, it's Burning Spear. I'm thinking of Burning Spear.
Well, Burning Spear, I love Burning Spear.
Yeah.
And there's also probably from around about the same time, there's a fantastic Aswad live record which was made at the Notting Hill Carnival, wasn't it? I think it was. Yeah, wonderful. Anyway, I was just listening to this and thinking what an extraordinary record it was, and I was listening particularly to a track, Judas Iscariot, and thinking, my God, that is just entirely Slavery Days by Burning Spear, which probably came out round about the same time. And, you know, look at the two covers together, same color scheme and all kinds of things. And I was thinking further we were talking the other week, in the light of Ed Sheeran's legal difficulties, about how ludicrous it is to try and pretend that all pop songs aren't related to each other and don't come from each other. How much is that the case when you look at reggae and you look at things like Misty and you look at things like artists like Burning Spear and I don't know, like Congos and loads of people like that, because they're effectively they are the same song
sequences. Exactly.
I mean, not just the chord sequences, Mark, because the amazing thing is the lyrical content. It's all very similar, because these are kind of hymns, they're sacred songs, if you like, you know what I mean? It's not just you don't get songs about somebody, fancying a girl or how Tuesday didn't go very well.
No,
they're member of Burning Spear.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're about Rastafarian themes and so forth. So how much is that? All pop music generally is just very close related to all other pop music. But how much more is that the case when you get to something like Burning Spear? It's absolutely extraordinary. That was I'm
remembering the old Danny Kelly joke about the John Peel show. Play Misty and Roots for me. That was the kind of hilarious late night DJ gag.
Oh, very good.
That was going to be his biography title, I think, for a memoir about John Peel.
So we've been recording a number of things this week, and one of the things we recorded that I don't think it's gone out yet is a chat with the writer Andrew Mail. Extraordinary charity shop out stuff that he pulls in on a regular basis, and we were looking at his records and talking about his favorites and things, and I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that he was talking about New Boots and Panties by Ian Dury, and about how he's growing up with that and how he became aware of the fact that you couldn't let Plasto Patricia play on that record if his parents were in the house. That's the case, isn't it? Because it famously begins with an extraordinary volley of obscenities.
Unbelievable. But actually, it's not that. The whole album, if you think about it, is pretty astonishing, isn't it? In terms of what's on it, because it's got, the original version, original UK pressings, and the American version had Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll. These are records that you just can't imagine being played now. Wake Up and Make Love to Me. That's kind of near the edge. Billericay Dicky.
It's more than near the edge, Mark.
God.
But here's the point. We didn't even think there was an edge then.
No, not remotely.
That's the interesting thing, is that New Boots and Panties was, a very big hit record. And I looked at this morning at just how big a hit record it was. It came out in the middle of 1977. It went into the charts, the LP charts, in late 1977. It spent literally the whole of 1978 in the charts and half of 1979. So it was, and if you want to know whether a record really sells, don't judge whether it went to number one or not, because New Boots and Panties didn't go to number one. I think the highest it got was number 8. But look at instead whether something remains in the chart. It's if you remain in the chart, that's when you really sell. a huge number of records. So that was selling in massive quantities.
But I mean, everything else on it. You think of the track Blockheads, even Blockheads. You must have seen parties of Blockheads with blotched and lagered skin. Blockheads with food particles in their teeth, what a horrible state they're in. I mean, even now, that specific attack on a particular stereotype probably wouldn't be encouraged. You're not allowed to ever go to do Blackmail Man at the end with the raspberry ripple. Do you remember that? And Bubble and Squeak. And I mean, every single track on that record, pretty much, is full of some kind of obscenity or outrage. Nobody at the time remarked on, did they? And it was sitting in how many thousands and thousands of households?
Absolutely.
When did they play? Did they play it when the kids were out? Did they play it when the kids were in and just ignore? I mean, I just don't know. It
was also on sale in, not just Virgin and HMV, it was on sale in Boots and Smiths.
Completely. Was it stickered saying?
There was no sticker as far as I can remember. There was no kind of, be careful with this record sticker that I can remember at all. And I was just looking this morning at the original reviews of the record, which as I say came out in mid-1977. So those reviews I was looking at Roy Carr's reviewing the Enemy and Vivian Goldman's reviewing Sounds and Tim Lott's reviewing Record Mirror. And they all kind of said the same thing, which is, well, this is extraordinary, but clearly it's not going to be a huge success. I mean, nobody's going to go for this kind of thing.
No, it's not commercial. It's a bit edgy.
It's
a bit street.
They all said it was really good, but it was clearly not going to be a big success. Well, it was absolutely a big success. But nobody at the time particularly thought of it as being wildly controversial. It was edgy, certainly. That was certainly the case. But, there weren't great think pieces about whether it was desirable, in its attitude. Yeah. And it's just absolutely extraordinary to think, There's a Hogarth exhibition on at the moment. I don't. Where's it on? Royal Academy on the Tate Britain, I think, and it's had to be accompanied by long kind of academic explanations of the context out of which all these Hogarth works came. And
what Gin Lane and
and to very carefully distance themselves from the content.
Yes,
saying, we know. We know how shocking this is. Well, isn't it a miracle that nobody's yet suggested that we should do that with New Boots and Panties? Yet.
The Word Podcast, prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
I know you just tweeted a thing about obscure rock biographies. And I was thinking at first of the definition being often reasonably obscure groups, and then by the least prominent member of them. I can remember reading a book about Nico called Songs They Never Play on the Radio. I think you read it too, by a guy called James Edward Young. Incredibly good. He was the keyboard player in this Nico group at a period of her life when they were kind of lurching from pillar to post. Incredibly revealing and extraordinary. But the responses you got on your thing are mostly just really, really bizarre, aren't they?
Well, except I'll be honest with this. I'll tell you how this started. Yesterday, I was trying to think. Somebody got in touch with me and said, why don't you do the Stack Waddy game anymore? And I said, well, to be honest, we ran out of things.
We ran out of categories. Yeah, absolutely.
If you try doing this for a year.
We get 60 of them.
Script writers, whatever.
That's right.
And anyway, I was thinking yesterday, could I invent? There are obscure rock biographies, and could I come up with 4 obscure ones and then make up one and challenge you to see if you could
spot the ringer?
Spot the ringer, and I couldn't really get that very far with it, but I found that there were loads of obscure ones, and I started with The Lost Roller by Nobby Clark, which Nobby Clark was the original lead singer and founding member of the Bay City Rollers. I didn't know this, and did sing on the very early hits, but when the tartan came along and the scream started,
Nobby was out.
Nobby was out.
Booted out.
But that hasn't stopped him many years later, penning his own musical autobiography. And so I threw this open to the massive and said, can people suggest, obscure rock biogs, and also what's the most distant relationship you can possibly have between the author and the actor, supposedly.
There are some absolutely brilliant examples, aren't there? I called him Babe. Elvis Presley's nurse remembers. And Matt Hill, I think it was, who sent it in and said, spoiler alert, she bought him his placebos during a 2-week stay at the Baptist Memorial Hospital. He bought her a Cadillac. You think that's just brilliant. Anybody, and with John Lennon's exactly the same thing. With John Lennon, anybody that big, anybody even remotely associated with him writes a book. Lennon's maid at the Dakota wrote a book, didn't she?
In Spanish, yes.
Yeah, that's right,
for the Spanish market.
Michael Hill wrote a book whose main claim to fame, I think, he was the guy who introduced John Lennon to Long Tall Sally by Little Richard when they were at school, and that's how I started John Lennon.
That's a book.
It's a book, exactly. And A Cheese Sandwich for John Lennon by Mary E. McMahon, which sounded absolutely amazing. Her basic thing is that I've not read this, but she'd seen the Quarrymen a few times. She'd hung around Liverpool in the early days. And I looked it up, and it says the book culminated with a hilarious chance meeting with a hungry young Beatle at Liverpool's Jacaranda Club, with a final and unexpected twist, obviously involving a cheese sandwich. I don't want to give it away, but I mean, that's the basis of a book. It's good, isn't
so it? Obviously all the members of the Quarrymen must have written books at one time or another. But just like starting over, and I think this was, again, another one that Matt Hill sent in, which is subtitled John Lennon and the Quarrymen, My Teenage Years by Charles Roberts. And I think Charles Roberts' association with that famous period is he's the person who took the photograph of John Lennon on the back of the truck.
That's a very strong card, I would say.
It's a really strong card, because nobody else can use that picture unless they pay you for using it. So he's no doubt protected it throughout the years. They got loads of them. Third Empire, this is the name on Twitter, who sent in Psychedelic Confessions of a Primal Screamer.
Oh, that's fantastic.
By Martin John, who it was their early tambourine player.
It's just so great. And there's only one picture of him, I think, in the band playing his tambourine. And there he is on the cover, tambourine very much to the fore.
Absolutely.
And he said that things were simmering away in the background. There's petty bickering, new girlfriends, members being sacked, our wages all being spent on an aborted LP. So I think he actually walked in the end. I thought that's the story of every group. But, that is a pretty tenuous link, isn't it?
But some of these I kind of want to read, actually, because I'm not disrespecting these things. Because
I love the idea.
Very often the little obscure memoir, very often is the thing that's got the little the nugget in.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you won't find anywhere else. Who was it? I was looking at one here for Greg Diamond suggested this. There's a book by Jacob Slichter. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Called So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star. And he was the drummer with Semisonic. So
Fantastic.
I like the idea that the drummer with Semisonic wrote a book. And it probably tells you something you wouldn't find anywhere else.
The drummer with Budgie wrote a book. The Ray Phillips story, I think it's the Ray Phillips story, an awful biography of a great life from Budgie to Tredegar and beyond. This is the man who I think left the group and then formed a group called 6 Ton Budgie, didn't he? Wasn't that the guy?
Oh, did he really?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think
there's a million and one stories. Ian Webster nominates a book called Mr. S, which this is quite interesting. Because this is subtitled, and the subtitle is always the key thing in publishing. The subtitle is what they're bothered about more than anything else. Mr. S, My Life with Sinatra by George Jacobs, his valet. Now, and so Ian is saying, how interesting could that be? I'm saying very, very interesting indeed.
Actually, I know about that. That's the one that's got all the stuff about all his love affairs, isn't it? Ava Gardner.
Is it really? Oh, of course.
Yeah, because if you're the valet, or whatever, you're there, right at the, you're watching this guy getting ready to go out. You're probably ferrying him about. Every element.
Well, where's the famous old French saying, "No man is a hero to his valet," because they know. They know more than their mates. The people who put them to bed at night and get them up in the morning. They are incredibly close to them.
I like the one that I think it was Nick Barber mentioned, one called "Boy Interrupted," which is a great title actually by Dale Hibbert. Dale Hibbert, original member of the Smiths, and I looked that one up too. He said he's an embittered original Smiths member, takes aim at his former bandmates in his new biography and manages to outgloom Morrissey. I thought this is completely in keeping with the general tenor of the group. They're all kind of desperately having a go, but he obviously just couldn't deal with the fact. He couldn't fathom, this guy says, as to why he was usurped by Andy Rourke, because he thought his performances on both tape and live were very, very strong. This is the man who made their demos public. So I can see why the other members of the group might have fallen out with him. But I mean, I think it's quite interesting that he wrote, it wasn't kind of just hilarious tales from the days in the Smiths. It was kind of I'm aggrieved. I should still be in there.
Absolutely. Which is probably similar. Another one that's been nominated is the Dallas Taylor book. Did you see this? Yeah. Dallas Taylor, who played drums with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and it's called Prisoner of Woodstock. I don't know exactly why. I have to read it to find out why. Yeah. But it suggests he resents the fact that people just want him for Woodstock, I suppose. Rather than, as he ought to be doing, thanking his lucky stars
all
those years later. People still remember.
And gets his name on the front of one of their albums.
Yeah. I've been intrigued by trying to find out more about this. There is a book called The Man Who Said No to the Beatles. There's a guy, he is, to give him his full title, he was a kind of Manchester musician. He was a mate of, all these bands and the Hollies, the Beatles and so forth. And he's obviously making the most of the fact that he has a really good picture on the cover, which is an old shot taken of him with arms around Paul McCartney back when they were young. So the book is called The Man Who Said No to the Beatles, and he goes by the name of Pete Jamside Down McLean, as if to indicate that whereas, Lady Luck has smiled upon other people, for Pete McLean, Lady Luck did not smile at all, and the toast always landed jam side down. So, 50, 60 years later.
But then he did say no to being in the Beatles, so he only has himself to blame.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
So Bono's poem, which has caused all manner of consternation, unsurprisingly, actually, on St. Patrick's Day, that was read out by Nancy Pelosi, the House Speaker, at an event. It was the annual Friends of Ireland lunch in Washington.
And they're all Friends of Ireland, all are they? American politicians, to a man or a woman. Yeah. They're all Friends of Ireland. They'll come from Ireland.
Very keen to be associated. I mean, my theory about this is, I know it's not a great poem, but my theory is, I don't think he ever intended this to be made public.
Well, okay. Well, if that's the case,
I think he probably sent that.
Read us it, Mark.
I will. I've actually got it here. I'll read. Right. Bizarrely, it's kind of three limericks. I mean, it is pretty shockingly awful. But okay, here it is. It goes, "Oh, St. Patrick, he drove out the snakes with his prayers, but that's not all it takes. For the snake symbolizes an evil that rises and hides in your heart as it breaks. And the evil has risen, my friends." My friends is a terrible phrase, isn't it? It's a bit like saying, or so I have read. The evil has risen, my friends, from the darkness that lives in some men. But in sorrow and fear, that's when saints can appear to drive out those old snakes once again. Slight lyrical trip up there.
Yeah, surely.
I know.
Too many syllables.
There's a classic coming up now. The last verse is, "And they struggle for us to be free from the psycho in this human family." Oh. I know. Ireland's sorrow and pain is now the Ukraine, and St. Patrick's name now Zelensky. I mean, my feeling is, I think he sent that to Pelosi and said, I just wrote something this morning and, and I think she ran with it. Would she have said to him, I am going to read this out at the lunch? And if she read it out at the lunch, it would then become public property. I don't know. Would he have actually said, please read this out? I would like it to go public. I think it's unlikely, in his defense, because it is a pretty extraordinary thing, isn't it?
My question to you is, Mark, why does everybody on God's earth think that at one time or another they can write poetry?
This is it, because you wouldn't do
same thing doesn't apply.
If you've never written a poem before, you wouldn't say, right, I'm now going to write poetry. You wouldn't say, I'm going to write a song about this, but you've never written a song before. I'm going to paint a picture. You can't paint. It is. I mean, it seems to be. I mean, how hard can it be? It's just a few words. They scan, they rhyme.
Oh,
I know.
And I was, there's another question I put out on Twitter this week is, Bono, how many pop stars have ever written a poem worth, half worth listening to? And of course, you get the usual responses. You get Leonard Cohen and stuff.
Well, Leonard Cohen was
a poet.
Yeah, he's
more a poet than a musician.
Absolutely. PJ Harvey's written some good poems. Nick Cave as well. But then that's the kind of multifaceted entities they are. Not many is the answer, isn't it?
No. But somehow, what the interesting thing is people always think that poetry is the appropriate medium to express something that they feel really strongly about.
Yeah, it's the supercharged medium, isn't it? Yeah. It's
so
soulful and so tragic. Yes. I'm going to have to write a poem. Only poetry will suffice.
Only poetry will do it. We've all, we've all read 1,000,001 poems written on the back of album covers, haven't we? When we were young and foolish, and thought, wow, that's really profound. And then you read them years later, no, please not. So I don't know if Bono's poem will be having, the immortality really, and no doubt seeks.
But I don't think I've not seen that posted anywhere apart from by her. So my feeling is she just went ahead and did it because she was kind of showing off about the connection that she might have with the fact that Bono, she's basically saying, Bono sent me an email this morning.
There you go.
That's in his defense.
That's all you need in this day and age, isn't it? And you've suddenly got a load of publicity for whatever your St. Patrick's Day lunch was. Talking of loads of publicity, did you see the story about Aimee Mann being
I did,
removed from the Steely Dan? We still call it a Steely Dan tour, even though it's Donald Fagen, really, but that obviously sells tickets. And she said that she was bounced from the tour because they didn't want a woman or something else. They didn't think a female performer would be the right thing for a Steely Dan tour.
I find that hard to believe too.
I find that
really. I think it made me quite cross. That actually it made me slightly cross that she was the person to allege that was the case.
Yeah.
I thought that was I think that's slightly unprofessional, actually. I'm sorry. And I think it very unlikely, because if that's what they thought in the highly unlikely event, then they would have worked out the principles upon which they book support acts, and everything would have to be, cleared and ticked off by everybody involved. You wouldn't suddenly book somebody for a tour and then suddenly think, but hang on, we can't have her because we already agreed. You know what I mean? That we've got principles about that kind of act. I thought that was very unlikely. I'm sorry.
I think she may have just misspoke, as they say, in some interview or something like that. She may have thought,
think so.
I just can't resist saying
But the whole
this.
support act thing, it really fascinates me, actually, because there have been occasions where people kind of blew off the headline act, didn't they? Led Zeppelin and Vanilla Fudge and Little Feat and the Doobies, which I think you saw, didn't you? Didn't you see that? You did, yeah. Queen and Mott the Hoople and people like that. But I mean, that's because they're roughly in the same idiom, and so you could compare them. They're all rock and roll acts, I think the really clever thing is getting a support act. Like I remember seeing the Stones in 1976, supported by the group The Meters. Do you remember The Meters?
Oh yeah.
They're a funk group, and they were fantastic. But you couldn't really compare them because they were a different kind of group. and that I think is part of the trick, isn't it?
Well,
otherwise, you get someone who's in your kind of idiom, and then you try and make sure that they're never too good by not giving them a decent sound check.
Interesting thing about the Rolling Stones, I don't think anybody ever talks about nowadays. In the days when they had support acts, and I suppose I'm talking about the 70s, really.
Yeah.
They were always black support acts. They just always were. Stevie Wonder.
Yeah, Stevie Wonder
was the
they had Prince before anyone had ever heard of him.
Oh, did they? Okay.
They
certainly had the Meters, and I'm trying to think. Didn't they have Tina Turner support them at one point?
Yeah.
And there was it's very definite kind of gesture on the part of Mick Jagger. This is what we come from, kind of thing.
Absolutely.
That's
all credit to it.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And actually, you might say rather courageous, allowing Stevie Wonder to go on before you. But Stevie Wonder was quite grateful really at that point, because he wanted to get to that audience which he'd never gotten to before. So yes, Aimee Mann may have just gone a little far. Can I contrast Aimee Mann's handling of PR in the last week with Dolly Parton's?
Oh, I know, that was fantastic.
Dolly Parton's decision to do the only sensible thing anybody can ever do about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is to say, when she hears that they're thinking of inducting us, is to say, no, thank you, chaps. I really don't want to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I don't think I deserve it. Kind of
I thought that was fantastic.
So she gets the maximum publicity value out of it with no embarrassment whatsoever.
She comes out of it wonderfully. I thought that was really great. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame have had all sorts of people who aren't terribly rock and rolling before, haven't they? Etta James, they're ABBA, Laura Nyro, Darlene Love, Carole King, Nina Simone. They have tried. You can see.
Well, they're always just
for them. It's a really, really good publicity thing to get Dolly Parton. I thought it was just brilliant. that she turned it down, and she said, maybe I should try and make a rock and roll album, and then I'd qualify. She's
absolutely
terrific. Also, did you see that heckle the other day? She's on tour at the moment. Somebody tweeted about some drunk person in the audience shouted out, "I love you, Dolly," and shouted back, "I love you too, but I thought I told you to stay in the trunk," which is a really good heckle response.
It was
my favorite one.
Jackson Brown used to do the old. Used to go and see Jackson Brown, and there was always some woman. There would always be some woman in any audience just couldn't contain herself. And usually a woman in her 50s or with a serious job and responsibilities.
Yeah. And a husband looking very embarrassed.
She'd go, "I love you." And he used to go, "I think it's best we don't meet each other."
I thought you were going to say it. My mother's here again.
No.
My favourite ever heckle I remember was John Cooper Clarke. Somebody shouting out something incredibly rude at him on stage, and he said, "Your bus leaves in 10 minutes. Be under it," which I thought was really good.
So we've been reading the Roger Daltrey interview in the Times because he's publicising he's got Teenage Cancer Trust benefit shows, which he be fair, Roger Daltrey is putting a huge amount of work on the Teenage Cancer Trust over the years and raised an enormous amount of money, and he and Pete Townsend are doing a kind of Who acoustic set, I think. Anyway, gave an interview to the Times, in which he reminded us just how many children he's got.
It's complicated, isn't it?
It's very complicated.
Wasn't he talking about his 50th wedding anniversary?
Now, at least.
And he won't mind to say, but most people's 50th wedding anniversaries are not in any way tainted by the fact that they have had 3 children, so 3 daughters, isn't he? In what were described as they arrived separately and unexpectedly in his life after he got married in 1971. So that's complicated in itself.
Well, he got married. He got married first of all. I think he didn't he have to get married when he was.
Yeah, he's married when in the mid 60s, wasn't he?
Yeah, in the mid 60s, and then I think didn't he live in a house or something paid for by her father or something. who then found him straying, shall we say?
That's right.
And then chucked him out. And so he was out of house and home. This is before the Who had made it. And the Who didn't want him anymore because he'd had a fist fight with Keith.
When he ended up living in his car or something.
He lived in the van.
That's right.
And it was pretty much, you've got nowhere to live. You're out the group. You're out the family. You got no work. Got no nothing. And then at the last minute, the Who took him back. Nobody else took him back. The Who took him back, and then everything came afterwards, But yes, his wife, as you say, for more than 50 years, is Heather, an American.
Yeah.
Who was clearly been, well, apart from the fact that she's been a wife for 50 years.
Enormously forgiving.
Can I just, another thing about Heather is she's the person who told him to stop mucking about with his hair.
That's right.
And she was, because he used to put it wasn't gel, I don't know, there's some kind of treatment to give it, to stick it down in a kind of mod fashion. And then when she spent the night with him in a hotel, and he woke up, and she woke up to find him with this glorious explosion of curls kind of thing, which she'd never seen before, because this had always been secreted beneath this kind of, it looked like a child's toy's helmet. And she said, "Why don't you just leave your hair like that?" Which he did ever since. And at that point, he became a sex bomb.
That's right.
Simple as that. I know it's hard to understand for younger listeners, but there was a time in the 70s, Roger Daltrey, major sex bomb.
Huge sex bomb.
Could not be persuaded to perform wearing a shirt ever.
So are the rock stars with 8 children?
Other rock stars with 8 children?
Paul Weller.
Oh, really? Go on.
I think Paul Weller's got 8 children. I think so. I think by 4 different women. I'm pretty sure. Rod Stewart's certainly got 8 children, hasn't he?
Talking to Rod Stewart, did you see him supposedly mending the road near his place in Essex?
With some gravel that he uses to gargle with. Who was it who said that on the radio? It's very, very funny.
There were some potholes near his his castle in Essex, and he couldn't get the council to fix it. So he's Rod Stewart, so he could afford to get a contractor to come and fix it. And so for publicity value, he went out there and put on a kind of high-vis jacket.
High-vis jacket, exactly. I thought it was really good.
But he's also wearing clearly an absolutely box-fresh pair of trainers, which you would the last thing you would ever don prior to going out working with a road gang
I know.
on a wet day in Essex. He was clearly just there for the photo opportunity. So,
major leader in the children's stakes. Also, apart from Mick Jagger, obviously, who I think has 8 kids, hasn't he? 5 different women. Bob Marley. How many kids has Bob Marley?
I'll go on that.
11.
Oh, yeah.
11 children. One of which born just soon after he died. So it's astonishing.
But if you are, if you're Bob Marley or Mick Jagger or whoever, and you've got a lot of money to leave, you find yourself with a lot of children. I would have thought they come out of the woodwork, don't they? You know what I mean? Very often after people die, we had an assignation in a broom cupboard in Stuttgart in 1974 or whatever.
You owe me 2 million.
I'd like the rights to Ruby Tuesday, please. So Roger Daltrey, his children range from 41 to 58. 58.
I know. Isn't that amazing?
And
and he's got how many grand? He's got
15 grandchildren. The youngest 2.5, the oldest 27.
27. So he's very likely to be a great grandparent soon. It's fantastic, isn't it?
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
I've been enjoying reading Stephen Wilson's book, limited
really good,
edition of one. Yeah, we're talking to him this week, and I don't really know much about him, but in fact, I didn't know anything about him, but I found it really interesting. Really interesting. It's just really fresh and kind of enthusiastic, and
it's a rare example of a memoir that's entirely mapped out through music, isn't it? Nearly always. I failed my 11 plus. And I had a disastrous relationship with a girlfriend, and I hated my father. It's all about records, all about seeing records, hearing records.
Yeah.
Lovely bit where he says he was born on November 1967. He said the most significant thing about his birth was the fact that Pink Floyd had just finished recording Paint Box in a studio just a few miles away. That's the thing that mattered most to him. I thought it was really touching, actually. I like that.
He was like you. He's a huge fan of the Dukes of Stratosphere records.
And he formed a kind of Stratosphere group, didn't he, with Daft names?
And he was just obsessed with them. And but I think he said when he went and made his first Porcupine Tree record, he wanted to send it to Andy Partridge, but he didn't have his address. And then in the book, he says, I suppose I could have sent it to Andy Partridge, XTC, Swindon, and it would have found him. And I was reading this morning. I thought, yeah, it probably would, actually. And I thought to myself, does that apply right across the board? If you sent a letter, I don't want to expose anybody to loads of junk mail or anything. If you sent a letter to Elton John, Windsor, would it get to him? I think it probably would. It would, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Just I don't know.
Chris anybody Rea, in that area, it's the one house that you know who lived there, wouldn't you?
Rod Stewart, Essex. He'd probably find it, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
Whether he look at it or not. It would get there.
It'd get to him.
So is there anybody out there, involved in the Postal Service who can tell us how this actually works? Because, because you got postmen nowadays. I mean, postmen are brilliant. Postmen know everything. They obviously know everybody on their patch, don't they?
Yeah.
And so, Rod Stewart's postman knows where Rod Stewart lives, doesn't he? You know what I mean? It will find its way to him really simply without any need for postal codes or anything of that kind.
They would do.
And I think that probably applies right across the board. And it doesn't just apply with really big names. It probably applies with cultish names as well. You know what I mean? That stuff just finds its way there. So if you've got any experience of this or specialist familiarity with this whole question, we'd like to hear from you. We want to hear. We want to know.
I tell you what we should mention too is when we were talking to Andrew Mayle the other day, he was talking about gigs he went to see in the early 80s, I think. I think he went to see Curtis Mayfield, didn't he?
It did.
And there were 25 people there. He was saying how extraordinary that there were only 25 people there. And then we were saying, well, actually, in the early 80s, given the choice between seeing a legend and seeing the next big thing, you tended to go for the next big thing, didn't you?
You did.
I think it's interesting for lots of reasons. One is if you'd read about Echo and the Bunnymen in the music press, whatever, the main thing is you didn't really, if they hadn't been on top of the pops, you wouldn't know what they looked like. You couldn't just click and see these people in action. To satisfy that curiosity, you'd actually have to go and see them. And also, the whole idea of legends, acts that are now considered to be legends, the Stones and McCartney and Elton and the Who and Queen and Paul Simon, James Taylor, that hadn't happened, had it, in the early 80s? They were just, to a lot of people, kind of old and in the way and stuff.
They were cluttering up the place.
The only legends I remember at the time were mostly blues legends. I remember going to see B.B. King in 1979 and seeing Muddy Waters as well and John Lee Hooker. And I saw Chuck Berry. I can remember thinking, these people are kind of legends. And also Bob Marley. Bob Marley, somehow instantly, you had the feeling that you ought to go and see him. But otherwise, that whole idea. So now, if you've got the choice between seeing the next big thing and somebody who might be on their farewell tour, you're a bit torn, aren't you? Because you think, well, that's an opportunity I may not ever get again.
It's also people use the expression legend nowadays. They use it really freely, and I don't think people used to at all.
Yeah.
So if I talk to any of my children or whatever, they talk about musicians they wouldn't necessarily know, but they're aware of the fact that they're legends.
Yes, absolutely. They feel they ought to go and see them.
They ought to go and see them. They ought to know about them. Or
so you get that terrible spectacle of gigs of sons and daughters being dragged along usually by fathers saying, you have to see this. And the other thing is that you didn't have that idea that people were pioneers. Now, Kraftwerk, you have to come and see Kraftwerk because they are the great template for electronic dance music. Iggy Pop, Stevie Wonder, James Brown, but and then they weren't, were they? They were just somebody on their 6th album or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first major farewell tour I can remember was Tina Turner, which I think was probably in the late 80s. She embarked on her final tour. Because at that point, I know, probably still going. I just imagine.
I saw a piece of. I was reading a piece about the Rolling Stones this morning that they've given a lot of money to the Disasters Emergency Committee. Yeah. And hats off to them. And they're described by Hacko McHack, who's writing this piece, as the Start Me Up Rockers.
Oh, no. Oh, God.
No. But I suppose probably to most people, that's their most famous
the word massive on the website I always used to refer to the Beatles as the Hey Jude hitmakers. That's right. The HJH, actually, they were just known as the Beatles. Just
That's
the HJH.
True.
It's so funny.
That's true.
I know.
So, if you've got any more suggestions in that vein, get in touch.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.